Hello, my name is Sherry McRae, and I'm going to demonstrate some of the code I wrote in response to week three's coding assignment. I'm going to start with question 10. And what we're seeing on the screen now is the content of a scripts.js file, my JavaScript. So for each question, I printed to the console the question itself, wrote the code in response to the question, and then wrote to the console a few calls to the code to demonstrate whether it works or not. So for number 10, it says, write a function that takes an array of numbers and returns the average of all the elements of the array. So I wrote a function named average that takes an array of numbers. It creates a local variable named total, sets it to 0, and then it iterates through the array of numbers. And for each number in the array, it adds that number to the running total. And then at the end, it returns total divided by the size of the array that's passed in, which is array of numbers.length. That should give us the average of all the numbers passed in. So to test it out, we call average with an array that has an average of 2. And if we look at the console and look at the call, you can see here that it did return 2. Moving on, we can look at number 11 from the assignment. For number 11, the instructions say, write a function that takes 2 arrays of numbers and returns true if the average of the elements of the first array is greater than the average of the elements of the second array. So for this question, I'm going to refer back to the function called average that we just covered. And I've written a function called first average greater that takes in 2 arrays. And then for each of the arrays, it calls average. And if the average of the first array is greater than the average of the second array, it returns true. So let's take a look at the console and see how it performed. I call it 3 times. The first time I call it, I give it an array. I give it 2 arrays. The first one with an average of 2 and the second with an average of 5. So first average greater should be false. And over here on the right side, you can see that it did return false. The second time I call first average greater, I give it 2 arrays with the first one having the greater average. And so the answer is true as expected. And for the third call to first average greater, I give it 2 identical arrays. And because the first is not greater than the second, it returns false as we expect. And finally, I'm going to look at question number 13. Question number 13 says, create a function of your own that solves a problem. In comments, write what the function does and why you created it. So for this, I decided to create a function called second average greater, which does almost the same thing as first average greater, only it returns the opposite answer. So within second average greater, what I did that was kind of novel is I nested a function, which is identical to the function we looked at earlier that's called average. I renamed it nested average, and then I called it instead of calling average. So when you call the function second average greater, it goes here, calls nested average on the second array, and compares it to the nested average of the first array. And if the average of the second array is greater, it returns true. So let's look at the console and see what it did. Yes, second average greater got 2 arrays. The second one had an average of 5, which is greater than the average of the first one with an average of true, and it returned true. So it performed as expected. And that's the end of the demonstration.